if I have a superpower, it's buying terrible exotic cars cheap enough to be safe.
Yeah.
And so I've made a career out of that in the professional business and personally. So I have a bunch of cars that I bought for far less than they should be worth because they have terrible history. And even if the worst case thing ever happens, I could still retail my way out of it and be all right. I will say right now, I still have my Car Trek 9 and 10 cars because the market has slowed a little bit. So I have a 6-wheeled Range Rover that's utterly useless. And
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoking Tire Podcast, first week of shows 2023. This new year, you've got goals. I know it. I've got some goals myself, and Factor is here to help you and me achieve each and every one of them. You can save time and have the energy you need to tackle everything you need on your to-do list with Factor's ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Get Factor and not only skip the trip to the grocery store, but also skip the chopping, prepping, and cleaning up too. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes. All you got to do is heat and enjoy. I have been getting the Factor foods sent here to the studio for the last couple of months. You may have seen the ads we've done for them on the video side of the program, and Factor is great. The proteins, the pastas, the vegetables, all awesome. And no matter what your lifestyle is, Factor has the meals to help you live it to the fullest. There's keto, calorie smart, vegan, vegetarian, protein plus meals on the menu each week, prepared by chefs and approved by dietitians. Each meal has all of the ingredients you need to feel satisfied all day long. There's 34 chef-prepared options each week, and you can choose what you want. Plus, there's an assortment of 36 plus quick bites, smoothies, juices, and more satisfying add-ons. I really like their strawberry banana smoothie. It's very good. It's fruity. It doesn't taste like powdery. It tastes natural. They keep in the fridge for a long time. It's awesome. Are you looking to cut back on takeout? Get Factor instead. Not only is Factor cheaper than takeout, but meals are ready quicker in just 2 minutes, and not that time where you have food now and when you're hungry, you can eat. It's not then you start to figure out what to shop for, then you start to figure out what to order. You end up getting really, really hungry before you actually eat, and then you end up overeating. So this is actually the better way forward. You can enjoy clean eating without the hassle. Just choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready in just 2 minutes. Here's what you got to do. Head to factor75.com/tire60 and use code TIRE60 to get 60% off your first box. That's code TIRE60 at factor75.com/tire60. Get 60% off your first box with Factor. Hit the link in the podcast or video description if you don't want to remember every bit of that. Of course, with a new year, it's time to re-up our Patreon at patreon.com/The Smoking Tire Podcast. You can get more involved with the show. Not only can you support the show directly, cutting out the middleman, you can also get an ad-free listening experience. You can ask questions to the show that we will read on the air and answer for you. You can get the show the day it's recorded rather than waiting until Tuesday or Thursday. Have it in advance, right? You can participate in our live streams, and you can get an extra episode of the podcast every month just for our Patreon Pro Driver level. Plans start at just $2.99 a month, and you can get a discount if you get the whole year up front. Patreon.com/The Smoking Tire Podcast is the best way to support your favorite car podcast directly, cutting out the middleman, and we love our patrons so very much. Thank you for supporting us in 2022, and we look forward to hopefully a new crop of patrons in 2023. All right, folks, on today's episode of the podcast, we've got Ed Bolian of VinWiki and Car Trek calling in from his home studio in Atlanta. Of course, we talk about buying and selling exotic cars, making money, losing money, whether buying a cheap exotic really captures the experience of what owning an exotic car is all about. And of course, in light of the very tragic news that we have lost legendary racing driver Ken Block in a sad snowmobiling accident, Ed and I and Zach do 20 minutes or so on what Ken meant to the world of content creators and car enthusiasts. And so, of course, this episode is in memory of Ken Block, his family, his crew, and the whole world who will be missing him. But let's welcome Ed Bolian of VinWiki and Car Trek on today's episode of the Smoking Tire Podcast. Hello, buddy. Happy New Year.
How are you? Happy New Year.
It started off good. We had a good day. We had one day of good, and then Ken Block died.
Yeah.
And then it turned bad.
That's right.
That's so shitty.
Yes. Yes, it is.
And it's like, I was talking to Thaddeus about this because Thaddeus works for Ken over in Utah, and we were just like, it's not, when a racing driver or someone who does crazy shit in cars dies doing that, it's terrible, but you every time they get in the car, you're kind of prepared that could happen. But when it's like on vacation, they go on vacation for New Year's and just like go out to fucking ride his snowmobile,
which he's done a lot. Like,
which
he's
is
a very
lot.
good rider.
Yeah, and just like doesn't come back. That's like, I guess it's same thing with Schumacher or someone else who just does crazy shit for a living, somehow survives that, only to die in a mundane and unrelated way. Not mundane, but you know what I mean? Like not related to their
in a way
sport.
that is far less extreme than their main activity. Like
right.
Schumacher in F1 cars, or Ken like sliding on the edge of Pikes Peak. Those seem far riskier than out for a snowmobile ride with some friends. Yeah.
Ed, we're about the same age, give or take. Do you remember Gymkhana 1?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was such a perfect piece of content for the platform. And I think the piece that you wrote for Road and Track was perfect in the way that it described, just the beginning of what today is in this content creation world. I mean, it was the moon landing of car content. Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. I hadn't watched it in a very long time. And I was asked by my editor, Mike Guy, to write this piece for Road and Track about 35 minutes after getting the news that Ken had died. Right. And I was kind of like, oh, God. I mean, on top of the horrible news and processing that, and it was like, oh, now I have to generate content about this and generate a piece of content that will somehow do justice to his life. And so the first thing I did was I went back and watched Gymkhana 1, which actually was a little harder to find than
480p.
Well, it turns out that word is quite SEO gold these days. So it's actually, yeah. So it's actually, and it's called DC Shoes Gymkhana Practice.
Oh yeah,
right. And it brought me back to when I first saw it with JF and Spinelli. And it was like, what is he practicing for? Is this a sport?
This is an Allen Iverson moment. Like, if this is practice, what is the Super Bowl of doing that?
Yeah, and it's like it's 4.5 minutes long, the video, right? He doesn't even do a trick until 1 minute and 5 seconds in. So there's this very sort of drawn out, sort of slow opening sequence of him just like starting the car and like kind of slowly driving out of the warehouse, and and he kills a set of tires a minute for 3 straight minutes. They even include the definition of the word Gymkhana,
which was needed back then.
Which was
we never heard of it,
right? And he didn't invent the concept, and actually the concept goes back to horses. It was almost like it's basically rodeo. It's basically an old word for rodeo with horses, and it's applied to cars. like barrel racing or out and backs and that kind of stuff. But to go back and watch it now and just watch little bits of it and go, well, that's the first time anyone did that shit. That shot where he does donuts around the Segway, the moving Segway, that was a holy shit Moses from the mountaintop kind of thing. Like, thou shalt do a thing that is very, very dangerous without a trophy at the other end of it,
Yeah, there's no podium. It was just him doing this stuff.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable, yeah. And then to continue it and step it up every time had to have been just such a daunting prospect of content creation. And I love the Gymkhana files and everything that Scotto did to help us to understand what really goes into it.
Yeah. And to one up himself, every year for 14 years, and also to somehow make a business case for that, and not just a business case for like little people like us, like a business case for global brands and a business case for somebody that was already operating at a scale that was 7, 8, 9 figures, is really, really amazing stuff. And then it's like, then he went and raced in the Imagine never driving a race car until you're 35 years old and getting to WRC from there. When the fuck has that ever happened?
Yeah, I mean, most of those drivers start when they're 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy stuff.
Well, he had, a foundation of action sports in like the hand-eye coordination and kind of that physical ability, especially for motocross. Motocross racers usually translate to four-wheeled motorsport very well. But still, like, he had to build that foundation, and I think it speaks to how much training he probably did, because he loved it. He loved it even when he wasn't doing it. He just couldn't afford it.
Yeah. I mean, that was a rich guy who knew how to spend his money properly.
He did.
He did the stuff I would probably do if I didn't actually need to earn any money anymore, Yeah,
built the cars, did it himself. I mean, just tried to figure out, exactly what the envelope could be when there wasn't an envelope to start with.
Right. Did you ever meet him, Ed?
No, I paths crossed several times, but never got to spend any time with him. But I mean, everything that you hear is that who we saw was who he was.
Yeah, I mean, he was very, quiet, thoughtful, not attention seeking when outside of the car. Really let the driving do the talking most of the time, but he always made time for people. He was always very, very nice. I mean, I've never heard him being mean to anybody ever. Mm-hmm. Just super, super sad when someone like that dies in such a sudden and unexpected way, when they clearly still had a lot left on their plate to do. This dude was not retired by any means.
No, definitely not.
And of course had a young family and all of that. So there's so many levels of the of how sad it is that he's gone.
Yeah.
Well, and seeing that post that he made yesterday about his daughter's Audi build finishing, her being 16 years old, it just, as a parent, it puts so much into perspective of, not only the body of work that we're creating for our own legacies, but, how that impacts the generations to follow, and what he's done that his family could never understand, what he's done for people like us that were so inspired and just so impressed by the work that he's done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little, it's not that I wasn't inspired. Obviously, I was inspired by what he and Scotto did together on a content perspective, and inspired by how hard he pushed the driving. My inspiration for doing this job was more from Top Gear, but anyone who's 5 or more years younger than me and was not yet creating content when Gymkhana 1 and 2 came out, that was such an inspiration for people to get started to do that kind of stuff. I mean, it all of a sudden, it seemed like it shifted to sanctioned dirtbaggery, in cars, like spinning your car, like the car not being a shiny tool that you would bring to a car show or show off, and instead became just a machine for you to do this sort of artistry and
well, he took. He was a skateboarder, and like skateboarding is basically about expression. So is snowboarding, and unless you're doing a slalom race, like freestyle snowboarding, half pipe, it's like, how do you think you can go down this particular slope in the coolest way?
Right.
And when I watched Gymkhana 1 before I ever saw drifting on the internet, and I went, what the fuck is this? Because I was skateboarding in college, and then I saw this, which combined my love of cars, and it's like, you can do that with a car on tarmac? Like that's allowed. And it basically threw open this door of like, well, this is not drag racing and it's not road course, and it's clearly just kind of for fun. And that totally inspired me to look at cars in a different way. And I think what's great about him creating the Hoonigans and the torch they've carried is it's just like, bring everyone from every circle of cars who just wants to have fun in whatever way they want to have fun, and everyone gets along.
Yeah.
And that's what was so cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it fit the context so well as a content creation product. It was something that had no context. Nobody had any expectation of what it was going to be. You're just suddenly in it because somebody sent it to you, and you're like, that is exactly what I want to happen every time I open up YouTube. And I think that when we were transitioning from traditional print and cable television towards streaming or online model, it took a long time for people to figure out how to use the opportunity to have that much audience exposure and engagement and everything like that, and what was necessary and what wasn't. And so It was a guy we didn't know in a car we didn't understand, doing something we hadn't seen in a place that didn't seem appropriate, but it was all okay and it was all awesome. And you continue that through however many, Travis Pastrana just finished, I guess, 12. And I mean, it's unbelievable to see what it became and how much it grew.
Yeah, well, it was like the first time. I don't know if I had ever seen motorsport for lack of a better phrase, direct to video. It was like you had Rendezvous in Paris, right? And you had things like, the Cannonball Run and movies that were loosely motorsport, but it was always, even on YouTube before, I'm back now, Zach, thank you, it was like there were clips of races, there were car-related clips, there was like street fire and street racing and some drifting and best motoring, but it was never like an entire type of motorsport that was created just for the video to exist. The video was it. It wasn't just a video of a race. It was about the creation of a motorsport video. And I think that was the first time that was ever actually done.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Wait, was it 08? Was that when
November 11th, 2008 was Gymkhana 1.
So that was also just a couple of years after Dustin Worrells and Dotto stopped doing Mischief. It was very in that vein, right? Like it was like very grassroots, very nobody knew what we were doing until we were done with it kind of idea.
Right.
And to me, it picked up that torch because that was, a platinum selling DVD at Circuit City type thing.
Yeah.
And this was
shout out to Ferretti too, because he was doing Super Speeders DVDs in 05 and 06, actually. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the Mischief shit and the early Gumball videos. But those were like antisocial. They weren't. It was. Look at this crazy shit we're doing on the street. Ken didn't do that. It was real rally driving, but it was closed course, and it wasn't sketchy. He made it. He made it legit, I think,
Well, when you're putting a wheel off a dock it's sketchy.
Well, yeah, I know. I mean, it eventually became the pushing of those limits with the locations and that kind of stuff. But I mean, the first one was like, oh, look what we can do with an airfield and some. I mean, it was literally cones. Like it was an airfield and cones. It wasn't, and the Segway was really the iconic thing. There was also two other things that Ken invented that haven't in all the tributes have not been talked about. In 2005, before YouTube, I went to visit my friend Matt Figliola in Tuckahoe, New York, at his shop AI Design. And you probably know AI because he did a lot of shady Cannonball stuff for people. He built Alex Roy's M5. Yep. He built a car for me, or modified my Mini Cooper with some very sketchy Cannonball-esque modifications. But I went down there, and I saw what I really believe was the very first matte black car of the modern era, and it was Ken's CLS 55, 2005 by AI Design, and I genuinely believe, there it is, I genuinely believe that was the first modern matte black car, and Ken had AI do it for him.
Didn't one of the E-Circuit guys have a matte black 360?
Yes, but that was 2 years later, and he fucking rattle canned it.
Yes, I know it was not our new. Was Ken's car painted or was it wrapped?
No, it was paint.
Oh, there we go.
AI painted it. Yeah, it was, and I think that really started the matte black. And Brad from E-Circuit, I remember that car. It was one of the nastiest 360s ever. But
Absolutely.
that was a couple years later. And the other thing Ken invented was the YouTuber face. Ken straight up invented the YouTuber face. That was directly him.
That's true.
And no one did it better.
Yeah, nobody. That's true. It's just something that we now do when we don't have much of a chin and we don't like the way our face looks when you catch us in the midst of us saying something.
Yeah, we take it for granted. Ken was the only. I read the Hoonigan center card brand guide for how to make a YouTuber thumbnail, and Ken was the only person on the team that was allowed to wear sunglasses in his YouTuber face. Everyone else had to take their sunglasses off, but Ken got to keep them on.
Oh, and the flat billed hat.
Dude, I mean, before 2008, were Subarus associated with flat bill hats? I don't think they were. I think they were associated with lumberjack shit right up until Gymkhana.
Absolutely, yeah. There are so many things. Now, the interesting thing, I don't know how much Wheel Pros paid for Hoonigan, but I wonder if it became more valuable than DC.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. That would be a good question. If he was able to cash out on that level twice, that would really be something. Yeah.
Yep.
It's
well, let's see. DC Shoes was sold in 2004 for $87 million.
Yeah. Which adjusted for inflación
is muy bueno.
Is very, very good.
Yeah.
I don't know what Wheel Pros paid.
Neither do I. I don't think it's public.
Yeah. Well, obviously we had a lot planned to talk about with Ed today, and then this happened yesterday. And so even though most people that are not patrons of our show won't hear it until next week, because we've recorded a little bit ahead because I'm traveling, it's definitely something that I've been thinking about for the last day. And if you want to read more, and I did write a thing for Road and Track. Glad you enjoyed it, Ed. And it's something we're all going to be thinking about for a very long time. And I don't want to spend our entire show talking about it today, but it definitely changed the mood of the day, the week, and even the year. And condolences to Ken's young family and to Scotto and the whole Hoonigan Enterprises team. It's very, very sad, and I'm sure the brand will live on. But man, What a loss.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, sorry, Ed. You picked a great day to come on the show.
That's it. That's it. Well, no, I mean, there's nothing more fun to talk about than people who have made a mark on what we do and who, whatever even it is that we do. But I appreciate you having me.
Well, aside from Ken, that's a good place to start. Who would you say were your biggest influences? Was it Brock Yates and Hal Needham, or was it where did your biggest influence come from?
Yeah, for me, it has to be, Yates and Clarkson. I think that the ways that they were able to take communication and mix it with cars, I think were most inspiring. And the fact that they were creating things that, particularly with Yates, that went into politics, went into things that weren't enthusiast driven. And, with Top Gear being the only car show you could ever get your girlfriend to watch with you, that was such a different product than was otherwise available. And so I think that, but then also, the idea that now I'm accidentally been making YouTube videos for 5 years, puts me in a different place in terms of the inspiration, because it was guys like you and Ferretti and that dude in blue and Shmee that have been doing it for 5 to 6 years longer than we had. And to really pave that path. I mean, I remember talking to DeMuro the first day. He was like, I might make $10,000 this month making YouTube videos. And I thought, it was a Wolf of Wall Street moment. It was like, you show me a pay stub with 10,000. That still just sounded crazy. And so what it has become, in the way that it grows every single year, to me is unreal. And looking back on the journey, it points back to those guys for sure.
Well, with VinWiki, I think you actually mastered something that I started, which is the micromanaging of the let's call it the hot side of the turbo, right? The only way to make money is to maximize your output and minimize your spend. And so for you to figure out to take one 2 or 3 hour interview with someone and cut that into 10 or more videos that have a virality and a controversial opinion generating quality to them is very, very savvy. And I certainly respect that kind of thought that goes into that process.
I appreciate that. For a very long time, you had our record of the most stories shot in one sitting. I think it was 13.
I think, it was 12 or 13. We did in like 3 hours, right?
Oh man, you just sat down and just, pumped them out. And
it wasn't hard. You fed me some whiskey and fucking spooled my ass right up.
That's the trick. That's the trick. But I think, it was
Who has the record now? Just wondering. You said for a time. Did someone beat me?
Ferretti did an unbelievable day once. I think he might have beaten you by one, and then Tamarian did 26 in 2 days late last year.
Yeah, Tamarian's got stories. Shout out to Curated in Miami.
Absolutely, yes. And so that was fun just because you've got car dealer stories tend to go a long way, and there's no shortage of them, fortunately. But, when we did a reunion of the old Cannonballers back in 2016, and they had a panel on the stage, and the goal was to have each of them introduce themselves in about 90 seconds. And I don't think any of them spoke for less than 15 minutes, and Spinelli was hosting it very inadequately. I mean, you just couldn't make
I love Spinelli, but he does not have the horsepower to shut that down.
No. It was a train wreck, but in the best possible way. But what it showed was these guys hadn't had anybody other than their bored grandkids to tell Cannonball stories to for decades, and somebody asked them about it, and they were not going to let go of the mic. Right. And there are so many car stories like that maybe you get to write about them, or maybe somebody, but at the end of the day, they don't make it as far as they could if they're packaged alongside other fun car stories and then just put out there to live forever, I suppose. And so that was really, the inspiration. And I'll be honest, it was something that Alex Royce said. It might have been on your podcast or somebody else's, but somebody had asked him to tell the lot of evidence story. And his response was...
That sounds right. Yeah, I think that's from our show, a long time ago.
And his immediate response was, that takes about 8.5 minutes. Do you want me to tell it all? And I looked at nobody in the room as I was listening. Who on earth knows how long their stories are? And
someone who's told them many times.
Exactly.
That's going to take about 0.8 of a gram of cocaine.
I got a tight 10.
Yeah. No, I think professional comics and Alex Roy know exactly how long their stories are. Yeah.
That's it. And so I just thought that, all right, that's brilliant. He spent some time refining it. And when I wrote my book about the Cannonball record in, 2014 and 15, I realized that a story about 3 sweaty guys driving really fast for a long time and not getting into any trouble wasn't all that interesting. And so I had to open it with related stories from the car industry that would relate something to whatever a little bit of drama was going to happen in that leg of the journey. And so I had kind of packaged my probably 10 best car stories into something that, I could at least tell succinctly and had the details that mattered and kind of had a payoff or whatever. And so I was not a professional storyteller by any stretch, but I just, had spent some time on it. And so we were kind of ready and looking for a way to promote the VinWiki app, and that's what became of it.
It's funny because like when I came to visit you, like I was like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Like, it's funny that became a record number of stories at the time, because I walked up your stairs to your little studio above your garage, and I was like, I don't really have any stories. I hadn't thought of it, and I don't know, whatever it was that you asked me or spun me down whatever road, it did turn into something. Do you find that the best performing videos are ones that reinforce people's opinions or counter their opinions and draw controversy?
In general, it's I think the way that the internet works today is that success comes from reinforcing opinions that people already held. I mean, that's what Facebook got into so much trouble over. But yeah, I think that,
shout out to the Chaos Machine. Have you read the Chaos Machine?
No, but I will check it out.
Yeah, you need to read it. It's a book about how when you value engagement over everything, you end up in a world of problems for society. And you just described it in one sentence, but you'd probably be interested in the whole thing. And,
the science is fascinating. For sure.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
No, exactly. But I think that when we look at a piece of content that's likely to be successful, hopefully it is somebody's reputation or resume boiled down into an entertaining and digestible, 10 minutes. Like that's really the goal, is if when you say that you love cars or when you say that you enjoy doing something in cars, like tell me what that is in something that happened. Not really. I don't want somebody to tell me their resume. I want them to tell me about the most interesting day of their life in cars.
Right.
And when you actually figure out what that is, you end up, even for the storyteller, helping them to understand what it is that they love about cars. Because we say that kind of thing, like, oh, I love cars. Well, that means something totally different to you, to me, to everybody else. And the more that we can understand what that is and invite sort of the diversity of that sentiment, I think the more entertaining we're going to end up being.
Yeah, that's true. And I also think with your sort of short format versus this long form format, with the podcast, what we've found, if you could boil down the success into just an alliterative sentence, we say famous or familiar, right? Because the audience doesn't want to meet new people that haven't been verified. So they either want someone they've heard of, and to see how Zach and I interact with someone who's got their own level of success and fame, or they want the familiar, which is just me and Zach talking about our own lives without anybody else. But with your format, the name of the person and whether they're famous or not, whether the people have heard of them or not, it's actually that goes to the background versus the headline of the story, which allows less heard of people to get real traction with your format. And I find that interesting.
I appreciate that. And you're right, because I'm only asking them for 10 to 15 minutes of their time. You'll be asking them for an hour or more. And I think you've got to sell that by who it is. Obviously, we've never really put the name of the person in the title or the thumbnail. In rare occasions, we've had storytellers that have told 10, 20, 30, 40 stories over the last, 5, 6 years now, that we will do compilations and things. But we've had a couple of guys that you would absolutely have never heard of. And they're usually good old Southern boys that have something to do with, the car business or whatever. And they are amazing storytellers. And it's captivating in the way that if you sat down next to two people at the bar and one was telling the other one of these stories and you just happened to be there to listen to it, you'd come away super glad that you spent the time in that seat.
Yeah, and there's something about an accent, whether it's Southern or Cockney or Philly Goomba or like Super Jersey. There's something about when a story is told in a vernacular where some of the words are like adjacent to standard words, but like not. I love this podcast called Are You Garbage? I talk about it all the time. And it's just these Philly Goombas, and the way that they could talk about and can and do talk about the most mundane shit, and the turns of phrase keep me really engaged. And I think, if you've got these Southern types, deep South car dealers, man, they could tell a story that otherwise is not particularly interesting, but just the little turns of phrase could keep you so engaged.
That's it. And, I know you've been experimenting with short content. I have as well. And nobody knows what on earth to do with it. Exactly, because it's not really a thing yet. But it definitely seems like there is a push there. But we're still talking about it. Well, not only are we taking it from your hour to my 10 minutes, now we got to be 40 seconds and make it worthwhile or interesting or whatever. And it's a lot easier for the people taking an Instagram post and turning it into a short video rather than us taking an hour of somebody's best stories and taking it down into something. 30 seconds.
I was talking to our we have a small company that does some social media work for us, just because Zach and I are oftentimes together. We're the only two people here. So like if we're off on a mountain somewhere, like neither of us is there to do it. So, and I go, so you want us to try to cut down this 10-minute video or 14-minute video into 3 or 4 minutes, and they go 45 seconds. And I go, do you know how hard that is? Like, what? I could barely say this is the 2021 Lamborghini Aventador Ultimate. That's like 11 seconds.
Car good, turn well.
Like
much gas.
What am I left with? I just don't, I hate to be like, the ADD generation, because like I'm a victim. I'm not a victim, but like it affects me as well and my attention span. But like, fuck me, do I not want to make that content? Right?
I actually did an experiment because I normally do a thank you to all of our sponsors around the end of the year. And so I tried to see if I could shout all my sponsors out in a coherent way in 60 seconds, which is kind of the max of most.
How many did you get?
I got all 13, but it usually took me like a minute 8. And so it took some refinement to get down there, but I finally got it done.
Yeah, take 74, and you're just like, kill me. Yeah, that's funny. But at the other end, we're talking about VinWiki, but you guys have also managed to find, quite a bit of success with the car trek thing, which obviously is inspired by Top Gear. And you don't, you've got some money to make it. It doesn't, I know what this kind of stuff costs, and it costs something, but obviously less than Top Gear has, but still you manage to find something that pulls in really solid numbers and resonates with people. What do you attribute the success of that format to? And of course, Car Trek 9 is out right now.
And that one on your screen is Car Trek 10. So our Christmas special was a feature-length single episode thing.
I guess I forgot. We talked to Freddie before Christmas, and there was another one coming out. Yeah, right. 10.
Correct. Yes, we did 10 of them in 3 years, which was, the total opposite of what we just finished talking about is taking long content and making it shorter. I mean, this was actually us like, all right, almost as a, and I don't want to sound cheesy or over dramatic with it, but almost as a stewardship of the audience's attention. Like, if they're giving us a way to earn a living and pay our bills by making internet videos, then we owe it to them to make the best thing we possibly can. And hopefully for that to be the most organic and, proper expression of why and how we love cars. And again, like I said, with all the Gymkhana films, like as a body of work, I love what Car Trek has become because it was exactly the fantasy that I grew up having. And it was a product of Auto Tempest as a sponsor saying, look, we love what you're doing on a daily basis. If we up the budget a bit, what could you do? And me and Freddie were sitting around the fire outside, and we said, why don't we do cheap car Top Gear challenges? That sounds like the greatest thing in the world. And then we did 10 of them.
It's. Do you think that the success of it has been the relatability of the cheap cars, the individual writing of the episodes, or the fact that you have 3 independently successful people collaborating and shoving their audiences all together onto one platform?
That's a good question. I think that the fact that we each have an audience who knows who we are was extremely valuable for chemistry, because we didn't have to spend 5 bad seasons making people understand who we were, what we liked, how we might react in a circumstance. They already kind of knew that, Tyler makes the bad decision so we don't have to. Freddie believes he can fix anything, even if that's rarely proven exactly to be the case. I'm going to go buy some stupid car with a bunch of credit, and that's probably the worst example of something really, really cool, and stretch the rules and end up somewhere. And when we all come together, we're going to have a lot of fun, and hopefully the audience can enjoy, kind of being along for that ride. I think it was the right type of content at the right time. We shot the first one right when people were starting to say COVID. And then we have been releasing them through a time where people were demanding higher quality, longer form content. We may be moving away from that as a direction, in terms of some of these platforms, but it felt like it was the right thing to do in the moment. And it's just been a way for us to actually be having as much fun as it looks like on screen. And as you know, somebody who does something that everybody else dreams of, it's fun sometimes, but it's also not all the time.
It can be very stressful, and it's not always fun, and it has to look that way. But the one thing that really surprised me is that, you guys buy your own cars for that series, and sometimes those cars are expensive. Quite often they get fucked up during the filming. I mean, not that you need to give away your tax returns here, but like, how does that work? I mean, because this is time consuming stuff, and I do, me and Freddie, we chat about budgets and stuff like that, where we're good enough friends where we can have those kind of conversations, and they know that doesn't leave our little text message thread. How does that math work?
Fortunately, the math works because of the way the whole world has worked in the automotive economics, is that the cars don't actually lose much value. And that was sort of the genesis of the conversations, was because the idea of what we could buy for the same price as a new C8 Corvette was the first Car Trek idea. So figure a $60,000 budget. And that was about, kind of the size of car that we could afford to buy without a need for it at the time, assuming almost all the money would be there when we went back for it. And so Freddie and Tyler lost a little bit of money on theirs. Freddie was trading towards something else. Tyler's always losing money on cars, so that's just what he does. I made a good bit of money on the Gallardo, but I kept it for a very long time because I loved the car. I just ran out of room for it eventually. And then we went cheaper for a good bit. So 2 was the most appreciated supercars on Earth. So It was I think Tyler paid $14,000 for a CL65. Freddie bought a $9,000 Maserati. I bought a $29,000 Vanquish, but it was a '03 Vanquish, so it was easy to sell for more than that when we were done. And then Freddie actually insisted upon buying it from me, and then he sold it to Tyler. So then we did the first Christmas one was cheap cars, $1,500, $2,000 cars. So we've done a lot of cheaper ones. The most recent one was the most expensive, or Car Trek 9 was the most expensive.
The Pebble
cars.
Beach one.
Yeah, exactly. But Freddie wanted to drive his McLaren. Tyler had already bought the 458 because that was exactly the kind of car that Tyler was going to buy for his channel anyway. And so I was really the one that was sort of put out on that one, and that was okay. But it was problematic because I had to buy a car for $100,000 to $140,000, about the same price as a new Z06. That wasn't a Z06, wasn't a Gallardo, wasn't a McLaren, wasn't a Ferrari, and so that really left me with an NSX, an R8, or a GT3. And a GT3 wasn't going to do anything in terms of appeal to camera. I'm not a huge NSX fan, so the R8 made sense. But all the terrible condition cars, the premise being wrecked exotics for the price of a new Z06, they were all too expensive. And so I ended up buying an actually very nice one.
Wait, the wrecked ones were too expensive, so you bought a nice one for even more?
Well, no, that was the same money, unfortunately. So in most cases, you expect that a car with a bad Carfax is 20% off of a retail value. A car with a branded title is 40% off. And so I was looking at lemon law buyback cars with multiple accidents on Carfax that were still 130 or 135 grand. And I bought a perfect one with 60,000 miles for that. And it was a 2017 V10 Plus R8. And so I wanted to buy an $80,000 or $90,000 one because that would have fit just perfectly, but they weren't that because we were buying them early this year or early in 22. And the
prices were still very high. Yeah,
so that was the most restrictive buying process. And usually that's where a Car Trek premise comes from, is that somebody finds the perfect car and then we kind of buy around that as for the rest of them. So like, for instance, Tyler found in Japan a manual transmission 456 GT. And so that was the perfect Ferrari for the price of a Toyota Camry because it was like 40 grand. And so then the idea became, all right, well, what other two Ferraris can you buy for the price of a Camry? Because that's about as cool of a video title as you could possibly imagine when you think of the Car Trek series.
Yeah. Freddie bought that awful 308.
Yes, he did.
It was literally the worst 308 imaginable. It was fucking trash. Did he actually trash that? Where did that thing go? He doesn't still have it, does he?
The Car Wizard bought it. Hoobie's Mechanic bought it. And that single video of him buying it gained him 60,000 subscribers in one day.
Wow, that's
more than
crazy.
any of us have ever experienced. But that was a good fun one. But then we needed a more modern car because the 456 wasn't going to get any clicks as a thumbnail car. Nobody cares about a 308 for modern automotive YouTube, and so we had to have something newer. And I had some really, really terrible like 430s and 360. Well, we'd already used the 360 in Car Trek 1, so it had to be a 430 or newer. So I ended up buying a Flood Title 599 for more than the budget, but offsetting it with some profit I had in a car that I was going to trade, just so that we'd have something more modern and more fun.
I mean, that's why you got balls, man, because I can't imagine going that deep out of pocket in a car I know is a shitbox, for a paycheck, where I might not get the money back for the car. I mean, there's a possibility. I mean, you're a smart buyer. You've been in the business a long time. You're not going to get totally hosed, but the possibility's there. You could get totally hosed. I mean, if you buy this piece of shit and you blow the motor during filming or something catastrophic happens, you're on the hook for that car. I can't. I mean, have you ever been like, hey, Auto Tempest, I bought this car for your production and it's now fucked.
Well, that is not usually a concern for me because if I have a superpower, it's buying terrible exotic cars cheap enough to be safe.
Yeah.
And so I've made a career out of that in the professional business and personally. So I have a bunch of cars that I bought for far less than they should be worth because they have terrible history. And even if the worst case thing ever happens, I could still retail my way out of it and be all right. I will say right now, I still have my Car Trek 9 and 10 cars because the market has slowed a little bit. So I have a 6-wheeled Range Rover that's utterly useless, and I have this R8, which is lovely transportation. But every time I want to drive a nice car, I just grab a Mercy.
R8s are not great for YouTube. YouTube doesn't really give a shit about R8s anymore. You know, I understand your rationale for buying it. You just did it out for us, and it makes total sense. The McLaren and the Ferrari, you know, were taken. But yeah, no, I mean, it's too bad because they're lovely cars. And you and I are both tall. Well, you 6'4", 6'5"? You're tall, right?
6'5", yep.
Yeah, when you're 6'5", an R8 is the best car in the world. I mean, it's a Huracan that you can fit in every day. I mean, it's lovely.
It is. If it was the only car you had, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And I had tried really hard to buy. There was a GT3 that floated around a lot early last year that was mint green, and it was just wholesale to wholesale transaction because there was this homeless person in California living in it for so long, and it was full of clothes and dirt and trash and everything else, and they had tried to wide body it at some point, so it had mostly been repainted. It had like, I
think I was this on fucking Switch Cars Doug's Instagram more than once?
Yes, it was. Yes, he went on kind of a crusade against the dealers that were trying to pretend the car was actually okay.
Yeah. I remember this.
he only went public with that car after my like 4th unsuccessful attempt at buying it because it was great, but it was $140,000 2018 manual GT3 that kept selling for $180. Because people didn't understand how bad it was.
That's so funny.
It ended up at Audi Jacksonville, and I think they eventually retailed out of it. But
Jacksonville, where good cars go to die.
That's it.
They retire there.
Jacksonville. I mean, God help you if you're over there. Amelia Island is nice, but the rest of it, yikes.
That's it. Well, congratulations on your new car. It's all broken in and ready to rock, isn't it?
It's so great. Oh my God,
it's
so crazy. Like it drives so great. You know, it now has an engine in it that is the kind of thing that if you just, it's the kind of thing Porsche should be building, you know, with that chassis, but they can't for a variety of reasons. And just the color's so great, and it's very satisfying to have a brand new Porsche that's also, you know, got this crazy motor in it, and Zach had a go in it the other day, and I realized you didn't have quite enough of a go. You need to have a dry go also, because it was a little damp when you were driving it.
That's true.
You were a little nervous because it was cold and wet, and it was our first day. But Zach needs to have another go when it's dry.
I will gladly accept that invitation. It's so fun.
Did you get a license plate that says 2 takes since they had to make it twice?
Oh, damn, that's good. That was a good one. People were suggesting Lost at Sea.
That's good.
People,
That's good.
there was some very good suggestions. But you know what, Ed?
Mermaid.
I'm a dealer now, so I have dealer plates.
Look at you.
Yeah, the best, the best. I am now in the land of plenty.
There you go.
I'm never going back. It is fucking lightful.
I love that, you know, after a career of driving everything, you were really able to narrow in on exactly the car that ticked all the boxes for you, and it was a little off the beaten path. Like, it's not something that people immediately assume. Somebody who, you know, the world's their oyster, they're going to figure out what to buy, that's where they end up, and I'm proud of you for finding it.
I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it until I tried it. When I went to Rick Demand's shop and I drove his car, within 5 minutes I went, "Oh, this is the thing. This is it. It's just stop the presses. We're getting in the game right here." And you know, I'm not it's not necessarily like this is the last NA Spider. Like I hesitate to use terms like last of anything, because you never know when they might change their minds or the regulations change, or like Porsche, I think, will figure out how to way to like mainstream EV their cars and keep gas powered GT cars because people love them. But it was the kind of thing, you know, and you know, because you drive new stuff and old stuff, if you're the kind of person that's always chasing the next thing, you're in that cycle forever.
Right.
Whereas I like my old stuff, I like my 80s cars, and I like analog, and this Boxster Spider with a stick shift and a key start and single zone climate control and straps pulls to open the door and a manual top. I mean, it just feels like it will always be like it is right now. It won't. Tech won't age it out, you know, and that's what I love about a car when it has a permanence to it, and like my E46 M3 or whatever, where the tech might move on, but it will always be this. And even if stuff gets faster, it will never get less fun because it's so engaging and fizzy, and that's what I love.
That's very well put. Yeah, the car is so quintessentially what it is, and it's not trying to be what it could be. You know, in the moment, it's not a 918.
Right.
It's exactly what it is, and that's a very good way to put it, because you know I had an LP640 and a Scud for a very, very long time, and I felt like that was really the perfect two-car combination. But while a Special and a Pista, you know, came out like that meant a lot more to the Scud than it did as an Aventador or an SVJ came out to the Mercy.
Right.
And so I was able to sell the Scud and not miss it, but I can't possibly imagine not having a manual transmission Mercy.
Especially, I mean, they have to be stick, right? Because, and I learned this, I mean, it seems sort of obvious, and a lot of people get this concept, but when I converted my Vanquish to stick, you know, that flappy paddle gearbox was a piece of shit when it was new, and it only got more shitty as other stuff got better. And when I first drove a Ferrari 458 with a dual clutch or a Porsche with PDK, you went, oh, paddles are like good now. Okay, all right. So those single clutches, whether it's a 360 or a 355 or an Aston Vanquish or a first-gen Mercy, those started to feel extra shitty real quick, and it was like, you know, an old brick cell phone or a Palm Pilot or just really outdated tech. And then we took that thing out, or took the mechanism out, and they put a shifter in it, and it was just like, aging curve stopped. It just immediately pulled it out of the aging curve, and it's going to go, okay, tech will move on, but this will feel like this forever, and it's no longer relative to the other cars around it. And that was such a magic moment.
I'll say that there are certain cars, like an Enzo or a Mercy SV or a Scud, even to an extent, a good 599, that as a single clutch sequential feel very of the moment, and it makes you feel then. That is nostalgic as we want to be about cars 15 years old, right? But I think that there is a part of it where because I do have an E-Gear SV, because the manual wouldn't be $5 million, but I like it for that. I still prefer my manual cars, no question, but I see when I'm there, I'm like, all right, well, when I was 16, this was the dream, and you know, I wanted to still hold on to that to an extent.
Well, yeah, and there's nothing wrong with wanting a specific experience from a specific period in your history, and there's nothing wrong with saying that some of those paddle shift systems are acceptable. You know, they're you know, like
they strive for acceptable.
Yeah, I've driven 599s, and I've driven, you know, the later 430s, and I drove an Enzo once, and they're acceptable. The Mercy SV acceptable, but it doesn't. It's not. You're never confused into thinking it's not an old car. Whereas, when I get in my E46 M3 or a it's 15 years old, but aside from the lack of CarPlay and the fact that it starts with a key, they could be selling that today. in a lot of the same ways.
Well, because that engagement that we love from good manual transmission cars is kind of how we judge new cars with manuals. We go, is this a good one? And it still compares to a good one from 10, 20, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah. And I really like that. I wanted to ask you, you've driven a lot of shitty versions of very exotic and collectible cars, because that's kind of your shtick. But having been in the business, you've also had the taste of great examples of those same or equivalent cars, right?
Yep.
You've driven a great Mercy and a bad Mercy. You've driven a great Gallardo and a bad Gallardo. You've driven a great Astons and bad ones. I have too, because I worked in the rental business for a while, and those cars were super beat. Yep. What is your, what are your thoughts on actually forgetting YouTube and the idea of I bought the cheapest, blah, blah, blah. We get it. That works. That's a formula that works. But like, if you're not making videos and you really just want to, you go, oh, God, I want a Mercy, but I can really only afford, the shittiest one out there. What are some of the real differences that you see between the experience of driving that cheap beat one versus a great one?
To me, it comes back to when you're around cars you can't afford, you develop presuppositions about the owners and how you feel about them. And whenever I was selling cars, I was a dealer for Lamborghini, McLaren, Aston Martin, Lotus. What I couldn't stand was these cars that would be driven a few hundred miles a year, and the owners that had to have them looking perfect and things like that. And so to me, what I wanted, more than I wanted to own the cars, I wanted to feel so comfortable using it that nothing would stop me from taking it wherever I wanted to go. And so it meant that I didn't mind miles or bad history or bad condition if it allowed me to have the car that I otherwise could not afford, or wouldn't have been able to justify hurting if I owned one that was too nice. And so I love cars that have been hurt or cars that have bad history that are maintained up and drive really nicely today, because you don't have to worry. And so that's, to me, there are people who, when they say they love cars, they mean, like Matt Mormon, they like having it in their garage, having it perfect, spending the time, avoiding their families so that the car can be exactly what they want it to be when they think about that car in its best form. And for me, it's having the highest mileage manual LP640 in the world, because I want to be able to drive it anywhere. And I drove it in the rain today to go get a haircut. I'm going to drive it down to Florida next week for a road trip. And, I don't care that it might eventually be worth 7 figures. Not 9 figures. That would be
9 figures.
Cars. Yeah. So not that I don't mind that's going to be worth 7 figures. I just know that I want to have the worst one so that I never have to worry about it. And then I bought the worst Roadster too, because it was available.
You're talking about miles, right? But sometimes the worst is like Tyler's 458 that he bought for Car Trek. Yeah. That's a piece of shit. That's a straight up shitbox. It has brakes on it that that are intentionally worse than the ones that came with the car. I've driven, back when I was working at the rental company, and I overlapped rental company and press cars a bit. I had started my journalism career, and I had driven rental cars that were the same. We had Gallardo LP 560s and stuff like that, and I was driving and C6 Corvettes, and then I was driving the press cars. And the press cars, they really just felt so much tighter and more refined and smoother, and I kind of went, oh, all right, I see what I never felt, again, like with the rental cars, like I was getting the full experience.
That's true. And if you have the means, as the Ferris Bueller would say, you should go out and buy the nicest example of whatever it is that you want. My experience has been, when it's all credit anyway, I can get 80% of the experience for 60% of the money or less, and that's a great deal.
Yeah.
And I have a lot less sensitivity to depreciation there. I'm just worried about maintenance expenses and repairs. And so it was always such a stretch for me to buy them that it's tough. And I'll be honest, as some of them have gone up in value, for me, based on my age, based on what I like, based on everything about what the car is, a Veyron Super Sport is really like it. And so I was about to trade about half that picture for a really nice Veyron Super Sport last year. And so the red Mercy was going to go, the green Mercy was going to go, the Spiker and the R8 were going to go. I was just going to keep the black Roadster and the project cars in the back, and I was going to have this car. But it honestly didn't feel right because the car was so perfect. And like, if I showed you the pictures of the accident that red Mercy was in, it was the whole front's off of it. And it was repaired well, and I love driving it now. That Spiker is actually a really, really nice car. That was an accident. Missy Elliott's mom misdescribed it to me when she sold it to me. But
misdescribed it?
Yeah, misdemeanor described. Yeah, she said it was. She said that it wouldn't run, and that she had no idea how many miles were on it. They hadn't seen it in 5 years. It had never really been serviced. There was just a lot of hair on the deal, and so it was one of these things I had to buy totally blind, and I got a really good deal on it, and it turned out that it was immaculate, 2,300 miles. They had just never really driven it much at all, but that's an awesome, very timeless car.
Spikers are the best. I loved Spikers.
Great
they
purchase.
were the fucking coolest. They're so nice to drive.
Yep.
It's so weird. A lot of those boutique-y cars, they don't work out for one reason or another. Spiker, who knows why they couldn't get any traction, but the very second the last dealer dumped the last new car, they shot up in value, and people all of a sudden appreciated them. And I've driven 3 or 4 different Spikers. Every single one of them was awesome. They're so cool.
Fun. Yeah, there's nothing like it, and people call it a poor man's Pagani, and that's very accurate. And Spiker's
That's
only
actually
mistake.
not far off. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? That's fine. Because Pagani's at $3 million.
I'll take it. Yeah, exactly. But there's only like 266 cars ever built, and they have so many features like center lock wheels and inboard pushrod suspension and louvered fenders and a functional roof scoop and exposed shift linkage and aircraft switches and all this stuff that you just can't find anywhere else. And I've always loved them. I've tried to buy several, but like you say, they just kind of got out of hand, and so I needed one in a very difficult circumstance. And I still haven't been able to buy the Spider that somebody ran over and killed somebody with in Japan.
Well, and you have a La Violette, which is even rarer, the hardtop.
Yeah, and it has timing chains, and it's they're great. The only issue that we had was getting the wheels off because they were massively over torqued, and that took tearing up some things. But we got it.
Oh no, that stinks.
Oh yeah.
If you ever get slightly bored of it and need a little extra go juice, VF Engineering makes a supercharger for this car.
I have heard that it is wonderful.
I drove it. It's got 525 horsepower. It shoots fire, and it is the coolest thing. And it's just a bolt-on. You don't have to do any other mods to the car.
Oh, that's great.
It's
I
real
might have to
cool.
think about that. The car is so pleasant to be in. 400 horsepower isn't as much as it felt like when we were kids, but man, it's just so nice to be in the car and take it anywhere, and the visibility is great. I can fit in it. It's a fun one for sure.
It's a stunner.
Who can service that thing?
Fortunately, we were a Spiker dealer, and so there are 2 mechanics that worked at Motorcars of Georgia while I was there that now have their own shops, and they're semi-retired, and so they can do anything that it needs. Most of the parts are Audi based, for mechanically at least, and so there's certain things like there's a little bitty crack in the roof panel on mine that's really not very replaceable. But there's a guy in the Netherlands that bought most of the tooling and most of the spare parts, and so like when I broke one of the center caps, he sent me one because he had a bunch, and so. There's a culture of people that want to make sure these things last. And Spiker's only mistake was that they entered the U.S. market in 2006 and 7, and then the world fell apart. And so they had all these cars they couldn't sell. The tires that were original on my 2009 car were from 2007. So they had planned to sell enough cars to run through the tires they bought from Michelin, and they just didn't. And so the cars were 300-ish in 06, and Then they dropped them, so mine was 225 new, which was still though more than an LP 560, more than an F430, more than a 997 GT2. So of all of the cool performance cars that it would have been against and where it was a little bit slower than it, probably it was a difficult value, but now they're awesome because nobody bought them.
Now 10, 12 years later, they're more valuable than basically all of those.
Oh, for sure.
They're more valuable than almost any Gallardo variant. They're more valuable than almost any Ferrari 430 variant, except like a delivery miles stick shift car might be more, but even then maybe not.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying before, Matt, about converting your ass into manual. Like it future proofs, because like this has. Like you said, this has all these characteristics that if they were in marketing materials right now, everyone would buy the car instantly. Like aerocraft switches, exposed shift linkage, like all these sexy things that the T33 and T50, they have some of them.
Right in the middle of this race between all the supercar manufacturers to get the latest technology that was still kind of in its infancy, Spyker, went the other way. They went hardcore analog. Exposed shifter linkage. Does yours have the airbag wheel or the fucking propeller wheel, steering wheel?
The only cars in the U.S. that had the propeller wheel were the press cars.
Okay.
And somehow they got them through. So no, mine has the Gallardo wheel.
Yours has the Gallardo steering wheel. Yeah. Which it's kind of the. I mean, I understand they need there's worse wheels than a Gallardo wheel, but that original wheel was the fucking shit. The propeller wheel was like. I mean, it was like that shit was like Baron von Munchausen.
Look at this interior.
That's so sick. It's so sick. And then look,
it's a 2009 car. I mean,
and then look
like
at the recycled Gallardo wheel in the other picture.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Mine, Mine doesn't have that cool stitching over the airbag. It's got the one like the brighter red one. But apparently, mine's the only black over ruby red. I think that's the sister car to mine, but that one's right-hand drive, mine's left-hand drive. But yeah, they're so cool. Now you got to help me find the Chrono Swiss watch for it.
The Chrono Swiss watch.
So I don't think they're that valuable, but I mean, I got to have it. And
I'm not one for matchy with the car and the watch normally, unless it's like Freddie's car where the watch can unlock the car. That's a pretty cool JLC collab. But yeah, the Chrono Swiss Spyker watch was pretty cool. Those are fucking rad.
That's a great car.
Yeah.
Whew.
But yeah, I mean, that's always been my experience, is that you could pay up and have the nicest example, or you can buy one that's, terrible and still enjoy it almost as much, but, have a better story to tell and save a lot of money. I mean, I took the nicest manual LP640 on earth. I had the Verde Ithaca car that a billionaire in Seattle now has. And I had this gigantic loan attached to it as they really started to go up in value. And I was able to make $135,000 on this car that I had put no money down on. But I was able to buy the worst possible example of the car for $120,000. So I went from having a gigantic loan on a car that I was scared to hurt to owning outright a car that, it had been crashed by a drunk 15-year-old who was working for his father-in-law, who was an Iranian terrorist drug dealer, refugee in Canada. But after it was fixed, it was a lovely car to own and drive, and I had the title in my drawer. So it's not an apples to apples experience, but I loved that car.
Yeah, I mean I know what you mean. I mean, my Ferrari 328 has many stories. It's not a salvage, but there was some real creative maintenance that was done with this thing, and but I will say that once I put the resources into getting it back to where it should be, the odometer's still high, 44,000 miles. The paint is not original, but mechanically it's where it's supposed to be. I noticed the difference, and so I would say, saving money by paying for a high miles car with stories, but that has actually been gone through and feels and drives like it's supposed to, as compared to like, you know, some fairly janky, loose feeling, you know, garbage that you get for cheap, you know, it's worth it to have a car that feels like it's supposed to feel. Because especially with cars from the 80s, so many people told me, oh, it's from the 80s, it's supposed to be shitty. They were just shitty. And like, it wasn't true at all. Like, it wasn't even close to being true.
Right.
Like, these things were expensive for a reason. It's not like people were totally stupid in the 80s. Like...
Oh, exactly. Yeah, we did a car swap thing for Car Trek 9 where I drove a proper $1 million downdraft Countach. It was a 5000S. And, you know, no, it's everything you dreamt it could be.
Yeah, they're great.
They're wonderful. They're tiny inside. I mean, my shoulders against the ceiling. But I could absolutely spend real time in one if I cut the roof off of it.
Was it a low boy car? Was it a
no?
If it was a 5000S, probably not. It probably had the standard roof.
Yeah, it was a Euro car that was imported, and but I mean it's only an inch different in the low body cars, but it's.
Hey, listen, when you don't have the inch, trust me, the inch makes a difference.
That's a shirt.
My head brushes. I don't have the hair, and my head brushes on the ceiling of mine. We're going up to visit Donnie tomorrow because we're doing not just the once every 5-year major. We're doing like the 20-year major on mine, where we're doing the shocks, the brakes, the bushings, the CV joints. We are taking apart and resealing the entire engine. It's a big one.
Valves, all the things. Yes.
No, it's a valve adjustment, but we've already done. The car had the stainless valves done before, so thank God. I mean, in my car, the valves is 50 G's, so like thank God we don't have to do that. But it's a big one, but it's worth it because you know that car has appreciated a lot of value, and I want to keep driving it.
That's it.
And when it runs,
and you got the Union.
Great.
You can't run the Union without having your car.
The Countach Union, yes, for sure. The Countach Union's bargaining power has been slightly weakened by the economy, but
that's fair. That's fair. The negotiation of top salaries is not nearly as easy as it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's true.
If you collect more Countaches, do you get more voting power?
Yes, it's one per Countach. Yeah, because when they want to book one, they ask about the color. So you gotta have two different colors. You double your bargaining
like
power.
Board seats.
Yeah. Right. Zach, do we have anything on the Patreon for Mr. Bolian?
Indeedle.
Of course, if you want to ask questions of our guests, patreon.com/the Smoking Tire Podcast. That's the way to do it. Check out our show live. Ask questions on the show. Get an ad-free listening and watching experience, and of course, an extra podcast every month. Let's see, Ed. Tom Rosenbaum says, any chance you want to have another go at Cannonball Glory?
That's a great question. No, I do not care to have a go at Cannonball Glory. I have had a lot of goes at Cannonball Fun since then and had even more fun. So I've done it in old cars, cheap cars, bad cars, and it's never a bad time when you drive New York to LA. We did it in a rental Camry last year and had a blast. So it's always something, but to go for it from an outright record perspective is well beyond my personal care factor and what it would take. I mean, the latest attempts have 35 plus scouts, and they're in 800 horsepower cars with a mission control system somewhere with a room of people watching everything. And so it's not the same game that me and Alex Roy were playing 10 years ago this year. But it's an amazing, community to be a part of. And I've had all the fun in the world.
It's interesting that the resources that it takes to do it in what you've just described. I wonder what do you think Brock would feel about that? Because the original Cannonballs were to protest the 55 mile an hour speed limit, and the ethos was that a prepared driver in a capable car could do it. much faster than that safely. But once it starts requiring teams and spotters, is that, I mean, and I get it. It's a hobby for people, and knock wood, so far, it doesn't seem like anyone's been hurt doing this. But do you feel that is above and beyond Brock's vision for Cannonball?
Well, he did set a pace time in a van and then bring a Ferrari Daytona and Dan Gurney to the first real race. So
what are you saying? No, just anything at your disposal? Is that what you're saying?
I think it very much is an anything goes kind of idea. But I think that, everything that Brock started in the spirit of what it is, we've just done the best we can to keep that going. And I think when I look back on the last decade of sort of being at the helm of it, I think that the community that we built, the excitement of all of the other motorcycle records and EV records and coast to coast to coast records and all the other things that people have been able to claim to attach themselves to the idea, I'm really, really happy with. I know that there was always, a very justifiable position that Yates held, that if it wasn't, 71, 72, 75, or 79, it wasn't real Cannonball, and I don't care what you say. And, good for him. He did it, and we love what he did with it. But, we're still here inspired by what he did. And I think in the same way, 10 years from now, if somebody's sliding a Subaru around an industrial park, if they want to call it Gymkhana, they should go right ahead.
Yeah. Lucas Taradas, predictable question here. I like you both and subscribe to both your channels. Take this question as genuine curiosity. When you do longer format videos, such as Ed's Car Trek and our All Cars Go to Heaven, do you ever feel any shame for so blatantly ripping off Top Gear? No, I don't at all.
I don't. Because I'm not apologizing or hiding it. It is an absolute ripoff of Top Gear, because it was the thing that I dreamt of doing the most. And if you asked me what I could be paid a little bit of money to go out and do, it would be that over and over and over again. And that's why, given the opportunity, that's what we did.
Yeah, it's never bothered me either. In the same way, ask, if Elvis Presley was around, would you ask him if he felt bad ripping off, Southern blues people? If you ask Jimmy Page if he ask any musician if they feel bad coming up with a riff that is evocative of the people that they were inspired by growing up. I mean, if I were to write a song on a guitar right now, it would probably sound a lot like a Pearl Jam song. And why? Because that's what I love listening to. And so you just end up creating something that is shades of that. And Top Gear was such a dominant format for so long that any show that is fun with cheap cars, they didn't invent that, by the way. Magazines were doing that before Top Gear did it on video for many, many years. And so, but yeah. And then Chris follows up, is there anything that someone can do on video with the cars that wouldn't be considered a blatant ripoff of Top Gear? And I would say Ken Block and Gymkhana. That would be one, right?
Yes, I would agree with, and that was probably the most beautiful thing about it is how unexpected it was. And Top Gear developed a formula, and look, three guys presenting cars is not a intellectual property that cannot be violated, but it was definitely something that inspired a lot of us, and it's been a whole lot of fun to try to emulate it. And anytime somebody says we haven't done a terrible job of it, I feel pretty pleased with myself.
Yeah. Greg Scott said, despite the fact that you just said you have no interest in doing another Cannonball, if you did, who would be in the car with you, and what car would you drive?
I think that the AMG superiority is still absolutely a thing, even though the Audis did really well during COVID. I have done a lot of Cannonballs and rally driving and things like that with Arnie Toman, and he's the guy who beat my record and has it now, and we're great friends, and he's wonderful. So I think he'd be the first call for sure. Just he's a lot better at looking through stabilized military grade binoculars than I am.
Michael Cosgrove says, what is your realistically obtainable dream car at this point? We talked about the Veyron Super Sport, although I don't know if that's good consumer advice, but you're operating on a different level with 4 fucking Mercies, so I don't know.
Well, and that's the answer, is it's Mercies. And that was a real existential problem for me, because when I bought my first one, I didn't know what to set goals about. Like, everything that I had done was really trying to figure out a way to afford a Mercy, and then I got one. And so for me, the Mercielago was always just everything that I love about cars in a car. And so I've got 3 of them for that reason. And if I only had one, that'd be fine too. But I kept telling other people to buy them, and they were buying ones that kept going up in value. So a couple of them came up, and I had to keep them.
I feel you. Andy in Colorado says, when calculating your rate of return and figuring out what cars are profitable, what are some things that may surprise those of us not in the industry? Oh, he's talking about buying a car to put in a rental pool. Any specific cars that are outliers in being good or bad rentals? Are you renting cars right now?
No, but I, had an exotic car rental business that I started in college and ran for several years. And it was really understanding the economics of ownership there that served me most in selling cars when it was hardest, right? So 2010, 11, when nothing exotic was easy to sell at all. What I learned running the exotic car rental business from 2006 to 2010 was that the average mile that I put on a Gallardo or a 360 cost $5.70. And that was all in with maintenance, insurance, expenses, consumables, depreciation, everything. And if you go out and look at Turo, that is not how much they cost. And Turo is an arena for people who have good enough credit but not enough math prowess to avoid making the decision of putting their cars out there for rent. You can float a payment a long time.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
And, it may be if you have more cars under warranty and you turn your fleet faster, you could do a little better than the depreciation that I was experiencing. But the problem is, if you're doing that, then you don't have the right financing to be legal. You don't have the right insurance and everything else. And so it is a tough business, added to the fact that it's now effortless for people to steal your cars and get away with it. So there is, today I would never be in the business. I pity Rob Ferretti, and I enjoy the stories that he continues to have and the nightmares that it entails. But I'm glad to have gotten out when it could still be considered a win.
Yeah, it's a very tough business. It's a very shady business. If you really want to make money, you can't. You almost can't do right by every customer and make money, and if you love the cars and if you want to spend time driving the cars yourself and that's part of your business plan, that's gonna be fucking brutal. One thing I learned when working for the rental company was, paying extra for a car that has like certain options, not worthwhile. Paying extra to get, call it a 911 Turbo versus a Carrera was not worth it. People are looking for a badge, and really the cheapest way to get into that badge. Manual transmission cars, don't even try it. That's a recipe for disaster. Let's see, under the cuff, Matt. I feel like I know the answer to this one. Ever thought of modifying an EV to do the Cannonball? If so, what would you consider? No, that's a fucking hard no. Although there are EV leaderboards, I believe, right?
Correct. Yeah. Edmunds did it right after we set the record, and it was exactly half the average speed. It was like 49 and change. And it's gone down a lot because the technology in EVs has massively improved. I think that the best right now, a P100D non-plaid long range is the one to use, but I think a Lucid Air range would probably take that. Do they charge as fast?
You can't use the charger.
They charge it if you can get to the 350 kilowatt chargers. They charge faster.
Okay.
If you can locate 350 chargers, if they're in the right place, and if they're running at the speed that they can run, a Lucid has 900 volt architecture and can charge at 350 kilowatts. So that's the one. But modify, fucking hell no. Imagine trying to modify one of them things.
Take weight out.
Just fuck out of here.
Out.
Not happening. Let's see. Travis says, I'm going to just use the second half of your question, Travis. What advice do you give to others about cars but rarely follow yourself?
Oh, there you go. I don't know. I try to put my money where my mouth is. And the thing is, again, you have to get a good enough deal on a bad enough car to have room. And very few people understand what wholesale is, much less what proper wholesale on a car with likely needs is. And so, I mean, I have bought a lot of cars for 30 to 40 cents on the retail dollar that were running and driving cars, but could any moment have been absolutely terrible. I mean, last year I bought a 2013 Gallardo LP 550 Spider out of the Virginia State Police impound that had been rattle can painted orange and had the VIN swapped and didn't have a title for $35,000. And that was enough to get away with it. But it, like, being able to number a car like that is really, really hard. And so all I say is be real careful when you're making your first offer, because if anybody else had made their first offer, it would have been twice what I paid, and then they would have gotten in a bad situation.
Yeah. In Georgia, where you're at, is there a difference? Like in California, there's a difference between being a wholesale dealer and being a retail dealer. Do they make that distinction in Georgia for you?
We do not have broker's licenses or anything other than a used car dealer license, and so you can't have title reassignment ability without having a full scale dealer's license.
But you can still shop at the auctions.
Yeah, but I just use other people's dealers' accounts to buy them.
Okay.
It's not in Georgia. It's really not economical for somebody who doesn't want the day-to-day task of buying and selling cars to have a dealer's license, because the cost, it's probably $5,000-$6,000 a year by the time you're done. And I don't need that. I just maintain trade credits. But what I mean with, like, people don't know what wholesale means is that people don't know how much delta there has to be between an anticipated selling price and what a dealer can justifiably pay for something in order to know that after the interest they're going to pay and they're having to turn it in 90 days, that they can have a profit at the end of the day.
Right. Let's see. Sanju says, Ed, how do I find the owner of a car? There's an E46 M3 parked in a condo parking near where I park for my commute. I checked the registration. It was last registered in 2020. I ran the VinWiki and Carfax, and it confirms the last record was from 2020. It indicates it's been sitting, but that's as far as I've gotten. What do I do?
Great question. We get a lot of these questions about what can I do about a sitting car. I found an abandoned car. There's a GT3 RS with 90,000 miles that a man's been living out of in Baltimore area that I've been trying to do the same thing with. The best way to do it without doing anything illegal is to look on the service history and call the dealer that has serviced the car that will be reporting to Carfax and ask that dealer to pass along your number to the owner. That is,
that's a good piece of advice.
Yeah, if you're not going to talk a DMV person into giving you information they're not supposed to, or do anything else, that's the best way to go about it.
That works. Dre in Houston says, Ed, any Porsches on your horizon? I saw 2 Cayennes in your driveway.
I love Cayennes. The best car Porsche ever made, in my opinion. That isn't a strawberry colored car. I love Cayennes. I have never been able to fall in love with a 911. I had a 993, I had a roof RT12S, and I've quickly grown tired of all of them.
You had an RT12S?
I did, yeah. I bought
one
it.
Just sold on Bring a Trailer for $450,000 2 days ago.
Yeah, I was really worried because the one that I sold it through Dallas, Jonathan Peck at Dallas Motorsports back in 2017, early probably, and I sold it for $154,000. And none of them had sold in a very, very long time at that one. There's only 6 US RT12Ss or RT12s or RT12Ss. But one of them sold on Bring a Trailer, a California emissions legal 530 horsepower car rather than a 730 horsepower car. for $910 last year. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so mine was coming up for sale at Amelia Island last year. And, mine is the perfect spec, narrow body, small mirror, integrated roll cage, rear wheel drive, tall gears, everything, carbon aero. And it was also a painted matte black car at a time when they weren't good at doing that. I was just going to do like 1.2 or something like that, but it brought about $450 as well. So,
is that your phone buzzing next to your mic? Move your fucking cell phone. It's not bothering me, but the audience is going to blame me for it. This happens all
Matt's
the time.
Fault. He told me that's where I should put it.
Get your fucking phone off the table. Like I'm having my phone on the table, guys. Come on.
There you go.
Chris Navio says, why do German manufacturers not use superchargers? He must have forgotten about the Audi S4 and Q5. They do use superchargers.
And all the 55 motor AMG cars that I love.
Yeah, every Mercedes with a 55. I'm going to nix your question for factual inaccuracy. A couple left. Do you have to go ahead? Do you have 5 minutes?
Oh. Okay, great. Cool. Go right ahead.
All right. Prashan says, Jeremy Clarkson once said, your favorite Lamborghini is the V12 Lambo from when you were 6. He's not wrong. I was 6 in 1987, and my car is a 1988 Countach. So that was very, very good. How does the Mercy experience hold up in 2023? I feel the design has aged beautifully. Well, we covered this quite a bit. I think 6-speed cars are permanent. They always are. E-Gear first-gen Mercy's not the best.
Yeah. I mean, relative to what else you could buy for the money, I would still enjoy the car an awful lot. But I would say, yeah, the driving experience holds up just because it makes any drive so special. And I mean, you can go out and go 200 miles an hour on a highway if you want to. I mean, they're plenty fast. They sound better than anything today. And I don't know. I guess I drink the Kool-Aid pretty hard, but I serve it too.
Yeah, and the styling has aged very beautifully, no matter which generation of car you're talking about. The interiors are really cool. They're neat cars. I mean, they are an experience, more so than an Aventador, for sure.
Yeah.
And they're much, much more reliable than Diablos.
Correct.
I fucking love Diablos, but man, are they a pain in the dick. You good luck even finding someone to work on one. They're really hard. You'll find someone to work on a Countach or a Miura before you'll find someone to work on a Diablo.
Yeah, they're tough. And, fortunately, we're learning how rare they are. I've done a lot of research with the factory on that in the last couple of months, and we've just learned how phenomenally rare every variant of the car is.
Early Diablos are still underpriced. They're undervalued, I think.
Yeah, one no-sailed on collecting cars yesterday for $1.25 or so, but it was in the Middle East. But it was, at this age, it could go anywhere. But yeah, the idea, $250,000, $300,000 for one of those cars for what it stands for at Cars and Coffee and what it means to so many people who were 6 back then, is, it's meaningful for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. We covered. Tyler B says, Ed, what car that you've owned do you most regret selling and why?
Good question. I had a manual transmission Euro 360 Spider that was had a great Tubi exhaust on it, and I had a blast in that car. I sold it with about 60,000 miles, just rock chipped as it could be. That's probably the only one that I really, really miss. Having the Paris Hilton SLR was probably the car that every non-car loving friend loved the most.
Those cars suck. I don't like those cars at all.
They're
they
widely
suck to drive.
varied. A lot of them do. That one drove really, really well. The brakes on many of them are really bad.
Yeah.
It had about 26,000 miles on it, and it drove well. I mean,
the brakes, we used to rent them shits out at Gotham. We had 2 SLRs we would rent out. The brakes were fucking horrible. That famous me and Ferretti first to get a speeding ticket challenge, I was driving the rental SLR, and it was a piece of junk.
Bad transmission.
I hated it. We had Gordon Murray on the podcast, and he thought it sucked too.
That was a really interesting conversation. It was, yeah. That's worth a listen.
If you happen to be stuck with one of those, our friends down at Rentec in Florida have a brake upgrade package for the SLR that is apparently very good.
Interesting.
Yeah, Hartmut down at Rentec. I fucking love that guy.
They probably put a
Yes.
diff in it too.
Yeah, and I hated those cars, but as a non-car person's car, it's I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah. So had a lot of fun in it, but yeah, that's.
Did you come up on that one? You get money out of that one?
A lot. Yeah, I took it from a marketplace. That's called an arbitrage, where somebody's marketplace at a Mannheim, Dallas did not appreciate the Paris Hilton attachment. The fan in Bosnia that bought it loves it.
Bosnia. Yeah. The Bolian pump and dump. Very good.
Don't clean the seat. I want to smell it.
Let's
Every
see.
single prospective buyer said that.
Yeah. Sean Gallagher says, would a 911 Carrera 4 be realistic as a daily year-round car with our winters? Fuck yeah, dude. Get a set of snow tires.
Yep.
Yeah, an all-wheel drive Porsche with snow tires is such a beast. So good and so much fun in the bad weather. They're the best. Last question. Alan Johnson says, do we think the recent batch of hot hatches, Civic Type R, GR Corolla, and Golf R will have long-standing value among enthusiasts down the road?
That's hard to say. In general, the initial depreciation narrows the gap. So, I love buying AMG spec Mercedes when they're 5 years old. So they're 1 year out of warranty. Because at that point, like my wife's GL63 was barely any more than a GL550. All right. So but then the next 5 years is very inexpensive because there will be a very long-term enthusiast premium on the cars, but the midterm is nothing. And
Right.
so I think that's generally the economics of how it works.
Right. So, like, what you see them depreciate sort of just like regular cars for a while, and then they kind of hit this floor, and they sort of stay there for another 5 or 6 years before the problem with hot hatches is it takes. Only the really, really mint ones are like investment grade. And who wants to buy a fucking Subaru or a Golf as an investment car? If what you want is an investment car, the long-term investment car, you can buy something that's way further down that curve now, is more special, more interesting, cooler on the weekends. Buying a brand new car and going, well, I need to use it as a car, but I also want to hang on to it for long enough where it becomes investment grade. You've got competing axes there, right?
Yes.
And the amount of time that's going to have to pass, most likely,
Right.
for that car to depreciate then rise,
Yeah.
is probably going to be decades unless some big changes happen. Like
I just saw yesterday or the day before a Hawkeye WRX, STI, Hawkeye STI. It had like 4,000 miles on it. Can you just pull up Bring a Trailer? Because I want to get it right. It was low miles, under 10,000 miles on a 15-year-old STI, and it sold for basically what that car would have gone for new with some inflation. So you'd have to keep this thing, not drive it very much, keep it really nice, but insure it, pay the interest on your loan, but treat it like it's a real collectible. Meanwhile, you're driving a car that's like nothing wrong with an STI, like it's fine, but like it's a regular car pretty much, So that's the problem with those types of brand new investment. What do we got there? 30. Go down. It was the white one. Yeah. So I was 20. 20,000 miles. Sorry, I was a little off there. Here's a 19,000 mile one for 45,000. So just to keep up with the MSRP plus inflation, you have to really treat this thing like a collectible. When it's not.
And inflation and time value of money are not the same things, especially
Correct.
in that car's lifetime. So, for a decade, the market returned 13%. That's quadrupling in value. So it's not a break-even proposition. It is the goal should always be minimizing ownership cost. And you can do that in many cases with the enthusiast spec car. But the reality is that most enthusiasts are bad with money, and we can't afford brand new cars. And so we have to wait for them to depreciate and buy them. And the only hope for them to become appreciating at that point is if few enough people were actually qualified and able to buy them new, that the later demand can cause upward mobility.
Right. If you are buying a new hot hatch, that you're not going to like this, your best bet for protecting your investment is to leave it fucking stock. That's it. I know it's hard, and I don't do it myself. You want the best advice I tell other people and don't listen to? Leave it stock. Every one of these cars, that brings big money on the auctions down the road, it's because there are so few stock ones left. Even if those cars had 100,000 miles on them or more, a stock STI that's 15 years old is worth money.
Look at the 240SXs.
Yeah.
Stock ones were like, oh my God, no one's drifted it or slid it into anything or dropped it yet. Like,
yes.
That's 15 grand for this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it from the Patreon. Thank you all for your questions. We appreciate every one of you. Of course, patreon.com/the Smoking Tire Podcast if you want to get in on that game. Ed Bolian, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
I know you don't come out to the West Side very often, but when you do, make sure you stop by and see us in the studio. Maybe Zach can do some stories for you.
That'd be great.
And, of course, VinWiki YouTube channel, VinWiki on all the social medias. Car Trek 9 and 10 are out now, the Christmas special, which are on Freddie's channel, right, on the Tavares channel.
That's right. Yep.
And, of course, Ed Bolian on Instagram. No punctuations, no funny business, just straight up scamming people out of shitty cars. No, I'm just kidding.
That's it.
Thanks for your
Come
time,
on down.
Ed. Tell all the Atlanta people I said hello.
Will do. And, y'all have a great afternoon. Happy New Year.
For the rest of y'alls, we are back tomorrow afternoon with Mitch McKee of MEngineering. We have heard so much about this guy's tuning ability, and he's going to be here in studio. He's coming in from, I believe, Arizona to join us in person. Very excited to talk to him. If you're a patron, make sure you get on those questions because we will be talking about tuning with Mitch McKee of MEngineering on the Smoking Tire Podcast. Have a good rest of your day, guys. R.I.P. Ken Block, the fucking legend. I know this will be out for most people long after the initial shock has moved on, but it was great to talk to Ed about some of our memories of Ken today, and mad respect and wishes to his family and his team in this time. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.